Drop a player in the chat if you want me to break that player down. I'll just kind of walk you through what I do, a process on Savant. I'm going to link the articles, the Statcast 101 articles that I've written so far. It's going to be a big series of these articles where just basically breaking down like what matters, what to look for, what's kind of useless on this profile. But I'll drop those in the chat right now, the two that I have released, and I just dropped the Cubs top prospects as well. That was like literally just now, so feel free to go check that out on the site. If you're hanging out in here and you have not made a profile here on Playback, see a couple visitors, I'd love you to do so and join the room. The bigger the room gets, the more recognition we get. This goes a long way. Playback's a big part of my future and being full-time in this industry, so I'd appreciate if you subscribe to the room and the YouTube channel. I'm throwing film up on the YouTube channel. I put me and Beck's stream last time on the YouTube, so that'll be there. This one will be there as well. We got a Nico Hoerner, so that'll be a fun one. He's a lot more fun to talk about than Acuna, who just won MVP. All right, so Nico Hoerner. Here's what I do when I go to a Baseball Savant profile. So first, well, we're getting reset. Thanks, Baseball Savant. All right, so you get to a player page. The sliders are much prettier than they used to be. If you remember, it was a lot less info on here before, and it was basically just like a lot of the same stats that told you a lot of the same thing. But I like the fact that they've added these batting, base running, and fielding run values. It is useful to some extent. I would say, honestly, that I don't pay a ton of attention to a lot of this up here. Everybody's like, oh, well, he's got a lot of blue sliders. Like, okay, he's not a good player. The only thing Nico Hoerner is good for is not striking out. Like, okay, yeah, I understand that. Like, people just want to look at the sliders and kind of paint a whole picture of a player. But I think a player is so much more complex than just what that shows you. So in all honesty, like, I'm not really using these sliders very much because, yeah, I mean, obviously you don't want to see a second percentile barrel rate of 1.8% on Nico Hoerner. But let's kind of look at what matters. So I'll just run down these stats, what's important, what's not. When you look at the batting profile, like xWOBA is like just, so it's expected weighted on base average. Using expected stats, like I'm not the biggest proponent of expected stats, but you can kind of go down here and see XBA, xSlug, xWOBA on contact. Like that's just expanded a little further on that. So what exactly do these mean? So the expected stats they're a little harder because everybody's kind of wants to quote them and say like, okay, like this player is unlucky, or they're expecting regression because they've been too lucky. And I'm not really sure that's the case because every year you have consistent players that over and underperform these metrics constantly. And so I believe that there is a use, but there's kind of a better way to look at these. So when we look at like expected batting average, basically what it does here, and one of the reasons like I'm not the biggest proponent of Savant's like expected batting average and why you should use Crosby Spencer's expected stats we have on the site is because they take much more into account. But the XBA on Baseball Savant, all it does is measures a couple of metrics and gives it a likelihood that it'd be a hit. So with XBA, it compares it to other comparable batted ball types in terms of exit velocity, in terms of launch angle, and on certain batted balls, it would include sprint speed as well. Like if it's a ground ball, that would be a contested run. So like Nico Hoerner may have quite a few of those because he's fast, puts the ball on the ground. So he may have sprint speed included in some of these. And then it basically lumps all those together and says like, how often were those two things, this kind of batted ball with exit velocity and launch angle, and sometimes sprint speed, going for a hit. And then it assigns each batted ball an expected batting average. Same is true for slugging percentage as well. When we're looking at this, it's basically just like, okay, here's these different metrics. We'll use these. And how often did this type of batted ball become a single, a double, a home run, etc. And then you get an X slug. So expected WOBA, or expected weighted on base, is a little different. Same thing, same concept though, using exit velocity, launch angle, and on some batted balls, sprint speed. We see that. And these batted balls are all assigned expected batting average. And ultimately from there, there's a big formula. This is the formula for WOBA. I don't know. It's off the top of my head, so I'm just going to read it off. The formula for WOBA is this. It's unintentional walk factor times unintentional walks plus hit by pitch factor times hit by pitch plus single factor times singles plus double factors times doubles plus triple factors times triples plus home run factor times home runs divided by at-bats plus unintentional walks, sacrifice flies, and hit by pitch, where the factor indicates the adjusted run expectancy of a batting event in context of the season as a whole. So a lot of jibber jabber basically to say, like, how often was the weighted on base or was the expected weighted on base for a certain player? So Pop asked a good question. Would you use BABIP or X stats to look at bad luck or good luck? And that's a good point. That's a good question. And in some circumstances, I would say that XBA or X stats kind of takes those things into account, like when you're looking at BABIP, because how often does that batted ball land for a hit would certainly have to do with BABIP, but you could have bad BABIP luck. So all I have to say is, yes, I would personally rather use BABIP and then look at things like, okay, is his BABIP low because he's just hitting the ball on the ground so often? Like, is this the case here? So on Savant, like, the interesting thing is, like, Savant's good for some things. I prefer Fangraphs for some things as well. But you can go here on Savant. We can look at Nico Hoerner's BABIP. Last year was 312. So the league average runs right around 300. I think it was 298 this year was league average. But naturally, some players are going to run higher BABIPs. So that's important to look at too. We can't just say, okay, like, this player ran an absurdly high BABIP, so naturally he's got to come down. Because a player that hits a lot of line drives and or has a high sprint speed is going to run higher BABIPs, and that could be a consistent thing. So we can't necessarily look at BABIP and say, okay, like, this player was just very lucky and they should regress, or this player had a really low BABIP, therefore he was unlucky and he should, have a potential, like, positive regression moving forward. I'm going to switch over to the Fangraphs leaderboard just real quick, because this is a good example, I think, when looking at BABIP and ultimately what we're looking at, like a leaderboard here. So when we see the BABIP leaderboard, Freddie Freeman at the top. Now, this is not a surprise to me. Like, I didn't know off the top of my head that Freddie Freeman was the BABIP leader, but Freddie Freeman hits a ton of line drives. He has, like, the highest sweet spot rate in baseball, which means the launch angle between 8 and 32 degrees. So he's hitting the ball at a very ideal launch angle. And naturally, when you do that, you're going to run higher BABIPs. So for somebody like Freddie Freeman, it's like, okay, like, yeah, he hit 331 with a 370 BABIP. Is he going to hit 331 again? Maybe not, but the 370 BABIP, like, I wouldn't say is a huge outlier, because one, while it looks like an outlier, he was 360 in 2022, 321 in 2021. What changed this year for lefties? The shifts. So lefties all ran higher BABIPs. I don't think it's crazy to say that Freeman could consistently run this level BABIP moving forward, given the amount of line drives that he hits, considering how hard he hits the ball. All those factors kind of taken into place. I mean, you look and he had a 27.5% line drive rate. He's a healthy amount of fly balls, and he hits the ball hard. So it's kind of like everything you want to see there. So that's a good question, Pop. I would say that BABIP within context is probably better to determine bad or good luck versus, like, expected, like XBA, etc., because we can look and we can dissect it a little bit and say, okay, like, was Freddie Freeman lucky to have a 370 BABIP? And I'd say, no, he wasn't, because one, he hits the ball so hard and he hits the ball on a line. Other players like a Bo Bichette's an interesting case. Is he lucky to have this kind of BABIP? No, I mean, like 355, he's a career 349 BABIP. He's got a healthy amount of line drives, 27.5%. He's a pretty quick runner. And ultimately, like, this is kind of profile that he's been and that we could expect him to be moving forward. So all that to kind of say expected stats, they have their uses, and I'm not the biggest fan of Savant's expected stats, but Crosby Spencer has his leaderboard at our site, and it's really, really good. His expected stats take way more things into account than what Savant does, because Savant's just taking 2 stats. But anyway, looking at Nico Hoerner. All right, going back to Statcast. All right, so here's what matters. Here's kind of a similar, here's what's similar, here's what I'm looking at. So I mentioned the sliders. You know, those are fine. I mean, they give a general glimpse of what a player is. There's a lot more to a player than the Savant sliders. You go and you look, and I don't know why the seasons are filtered weird, but anyway, 2023, he had 10 barrels, good for a 1.8% barrel rate. That is obviously not good because he's second percentile among all MLB hitters. And that's not to say that Nico Hoerner's a bad player because he doesn't barrel the ball, but I think barrel percentage is like one of the most all-encompassing stats that you can look at, is say, like, okay, like, he's hitting the ball hard and he's hitting the ball at ideal launch angles. Barrel rate is important because for a couple reasons. And I will pull up the kind of rolling chart so you can kind of see a little more about barrel rate. I think barrel rate is kind of the best and the most all-encompassing because of the fact that it does include multiple stats. And here's kind of the picture. So it's based on a sweet spot, basically, of launch angle and exit velocity. So the harder that a ball is hit, the wider range of exit velocity that it can have to be considered a barrel. But the minimum requirement for a batted ball to be considered a barrel is 98 miles per hour. So 98 is the minimum threshold. And what Savant does is it looks at similar hit types with exit velocity and launch angle, because that's all they're looking at for every stat here. And have these events led to at least a 500 batting average and at least a 1,500 slug on average? So if that ball is registered, we'll say it's registered at like 102 miles an hour and hit at a 17-degree launch angle, then that's probably going for a hit more often than 50% of the time. And it probably has a higher slugging percentage than 1,500. Therefore, it's going to get labeled a barrel. So when we look at barrels, the harder you hit it, obviously the easier it is to be classified as a barrel, but this is a rolling scale. Now, when you look at a lot of minor league data, minor league barrel percentages are going to be calculated a little bit differently, and that's why they look higher. They're not going to be on these nice rolling charts like MLB uses, but rather they are going to be on like a, basically, was it a hard hit ball, and was it hit between 10 and 35 degrees? That's what a lot of them do. So it's not the rolling scale that you normally see. But why is the barrel so important? In 2023, you can see here, barrels had a batting average of 742 on them, which is extremely high. That's incredible. And it produced a slug of 2,493, like highly impressive, a WOBA of 1291. High correlation with home runs. Barrel rate actually is like the strongest correlation with descriptiveness of home runs and predictiveness of home runs. When we look at a number, 15% is considered elite, 15% or higher, and anything in the 10 to 15 range is considered really good. 6 to 9% is average, but it's kind of trended upward a little bit. We're actually seeing, I'll show you this chart in just a second, we're actually seeing the barrel rate on a rise in general, but interesting kind of study here that I'll talk about in just a second. But last season, or in 2023, we saw that 86% of home runs were also a barrel. So very rarely was a home run not considered a barrel. Rare cases where that happens, where we had home runs that were below 98 miles an hour, which are just weird scenarios. I saw one that was hit 89 miles an hour in the AFL, which is weird, but that's Arizona for you. Ball just travels a little more. And on the flip side, 50% of all barrels were home runs as well. So that's obviously important stuff and kind of fun to look at. So barrel percentage matters in a lot of different ways. Why is it, though, that we have seen more home runs that were barrels, but less barrels that were home runs? I know that seems kind of like counterintuitive and backwards in a way, but how does that make sense? Well, ultimately, I think the ball's kind of deadened. That's just my belief, is the ball's been a little deader. You can see, I mean, when was the peak? Like 2019. Then this is just complete Statcast tracking era. So like we're looking at since Statcast became a thing in 2015, they started tracking this stuff. So barrel rate, or percentage of home runs that were barrels, consistently on the rise, and percentage of barrels that were home runs is kind of trending in the wrong direction. A little bit higher this year than it was in 2022, but 2019, nearly 60% of barrels went for home runs. 2017, 62% of barrels went for home runs. That's obviously all important stuff. So like barrels is kind of a all-encompassing stat that is good to look at. And that's just a long rant to say like, okay, like Nico Hoerner, his barrel rate was not great, but it's not to say that he's a bad player. He's just less likely to get to power. Like that's a big correlation with power. But anyway, let's go back to Hoerner. 10 total barrels this year. So 1.8% barrel percentage, which barrel percentage is per batted ball event, but you also have barrels per PA, which is looking at how often per plate appearance is a player getting a barrel. And then like you have your average exit velocity. That's simply, looking at all the sum of all the batted balls. Exit velocities averaged out. Average exit velocity is actually a much stronger correlation than max exit velocity. Everybody kind of want to quote max EV for power and potential power output. But I don't necessarily believe, and I know because I've ran the correlations and studies for every year that Statcast has been a thing, and the correlation is significantly lower for max EV with future power output than an average EV is. And honestly, why do we use 90th percentile? Well, that range has the highest correlation with future power and descriptive. Like it tells a better story. So honestly, Driveline, they use top 8th percent, which is not quite 90th percentile. Top 8%, I don't know. I'm not good with math, but that puts you like 86th, 87th percentile. I don't know. Somewhere in that range would be top 6% or top 8%, excuse me. And that's what Driveline is, because they found that as the most correlative. And that's something we're actually working to have on the site. Crosby and Jake, they used to work at Driveline. They're kind of working on something for us where they are, building this crazy leaderboard with smash factor, with all kind of cool, with bat speed and all this stuff, kind of to give us a better idea than what Savant's giving us. Because Savant's just giving us the basics, and that's fine. Savant's great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not crapping on Savant at all. But knowing what it stands for and how to use it, max EV, don't really care about. There's outliers. Things happen. And, it doesn't always tell us a great story. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. If you have another player you want to look at, drop in the chat. I'm just going to kind of keep walking through like what I'm looking at when I'm evaluating a player. Average launch angle, terrible thing to use in my opinion. Why? Because it's all about consistency. Average launch angle is just simply that. It's an average. So if I hit a batted ball negative 30 degrees for a ground ball, and then I hit a pop-up at 60 degrees, what is that going to average out to? You can do the math. Those two batted balls give you a 15-degree average launch angle. That's like the ideal launch angle on a single batted ball. But they were two totally terrible outcomes either way. A negative 30-degree ground ball and a 60-degree pop-up are both terrible. So they average out. They don't tell a good story. Standard deviation launch angle is good. It's something that we'll have on the site pretty soon. You can't see it on Savant, but standard deviation is looking at launch angle, quote, tightness per se, or how consistent is a player with a batted ball event. So how often are they hitting it in ideal spots? Which is why, if you're on Savant, sweet spot percentage paints the best picture there, because sweet spot percentage is looking at batted balls between 8 degrees and 32 degrees, which gives you a good factor of like How often is the ball going to go for a hit? Much better than launch angle. I use launch angle for literally like nothing anymore. So, I mean, if you want to use it, that's fine. But standard deviation, launch angle, sweet spot percentage, much better. So when we go to sweet spot percentage, we were talking about Freddie Freeman's BABIP. If you remember, Luis Arias was at the top of the BABIP list. Those are the guys that hit the ball at the ideal launch angle the most often. Sweet spot percentage of 46.6%. Nearly half of Freddie Freeman's batted balls are at the ideal launch angle. It explains why he hits for high batting average. It explains why he hits plenty of line drives. All those things are important. Now, his launch angle, perfect, 15 degrees. But you're going to have some players at 15 degrees that have a low sweet spot percentage. We can just go and look at some examples here. Some guys in similar ranges as Freddie Freeman that may not hit the ball in the sweet spot as often. Jason Hayward, 33%. That's 13% lower sweet spot percentage. So he's not hitting the sweet spot nearly as often. Hunter Renfroe, 15-degree launch angle, 29% sweet spot percentage. Not good. Josh Young, however, 42% sweet spot. Really good. 15-degree launch angle, ideal. You want to look for both those things. If you're going to use launch angle, incorporate sweet spot percentage too, because that's going to paint you a good picture of what a player is doing more often. So, yeah, Hoerner, whatever, he's not the most enticing Savant player, but Vladimir Guerrero is. Thanks, Greg. Let's go to Vlad Guerrero Jr. And what are we looking at here in his profile? There's a lot of red off the bat. You might look and say, okay, why is he performing like he is? Oh, interesting. 32% sweet spot percentage, 28th percentile among all hitters. Hitting a lot of ground balls. He's gone back to his ways of just pounding the ball in the ground. I mean, Vlad is, and has an elite hitter in him. We've seen it. Look at that 2021 season. Everybody knows he hit 48 home runs, 311 average, 401 OBP, 601 slug. There were a large portion of games in minor league parks that were very hitter friendly. And so from that standpoint, I wonder, what is Vlad Guerrero going to be? I have a tough time evaluating him. But he's 24 years old. We've seen the pedigree. We look and we see, okay, like he does so many things well. And I believe that he's going to bounce back. I think he's a pretty good buy in Dynasty right now. Let's look at the profile. And I'll show you, I'm actually going to use some of these charts in a second to kind of look at this, kind of break it down a little more. But look at Vlad Jr. He hits the ball consistently hard. He has, the average EVs really, really good every year. 2020, 92.5, top 7% of the league. 95.1, top 1% of the league. 92.8, it's top 4% of the league. This year, 92.1, top 9% of the league. The barrel rate's really good. The last 3 seasons, 15.1%, 11.2%, 11.1%. It's really awesome to see these things. This is what you want to see in a profile. And Vlad checks boxes in that sense. Here's another flaw of launch angle. Oh, man, look, Vlad has a launch angle of 10.5 degrees. That looks good. That's ideal. Much better than this 4.3 degrees that he was last year. But if we go and we break it down a little further, the ground ball rates were still high. 52% on the ground last year, 45% on the ground this year. More pop-ups this year. It's going to kind of balance out the launch angle. Even though he hit less ground balls, he also hit more pop-ups and more line drives is going to help the launch angle. This is why I don't like looking at launch angle in general. Vlad's never had a high sweet spot percentage, and that's what you'd like to see increase. That's really the biggest factor here, where Vlad, if he lifts the ball a little bit more, he could really have that monster season because he does damage. You can see the damage here on his xwOBAcon. So this is only on contact, pitches that he makes contact on. What kind of damage is he doing? 402 xwOBAcon, 463 xwOBAcon in 2021. Those are elite numbers. So hard hit rates, all check the boxes. 50% or higher every year, and right there at that number this year at 49.2%. The K rate is trended downward every year. He walks near 10%. Like Vlad checks like nearly every box that you want to see, which is like, okay, well, Where's he going wrong? So this is a cool thing, and I think that these charts are especially more useful for pitchers personally, but you can use them for hitters as well. You can look at how hitters have performed over time. You can change the metrics. It's just going to default you and show you like what percent of pitches of pitch types did this player see. So we can look at average EV for pitch types. You can see 2021, Vlad was just mashing fastballs, had a 97.2 mile an hour average EV on fastballs, and it's settled in around the 93 range the last 2 years. But you can also just go to all pitches, and that way you can just kind of look at a kind of a continual graph. Basically, if you don't need to see all pitch types, it's being really slow. There we go. So this is just looking at his average EV year over year, average launch angle year over year. You see inconsistency, but where is he? What's causing him to hit the ball on the ground? Okay, he's actually lifting the ball more with breaking balls, and the off-speed pitches he's kind of hammering. Off-speed's going to be like your changeups, etc. So 2-degree launch angle there. We've seen it be low. It was -2 last year. So we can also look at things like barrel percentage, which we know is really good. You can look at like the swing and miss, the amount of pitches he's seen in zone, like is he chasing more, all these different things. So those are pretty useful too. I like to look at it more for pitchers. I'll break down pitchers another day because I haven't wrote the pitcher articles. But ultimately, like I feel like this is pretty useful to look. So here's Vlad's ground ball percentage. Off speed, we saw the launch angle was low. Ground ball rate really high for off speed pitches. So the changeups, 65% of off speed pitches that he made contact with last year were ground balls. This year, 54%. It's kind of positive. Hitting fastballs on the ground too much. And breaking balls, we saw he lifted a little more. That kind of correlates with his launch angle that we saw. Is he popping any balls up more? I mean, not really. So anyway, the pitch tracker, I think, is pretty useful in a way because you can look and it kind of breaks it down even more. Like, is there a specific pitch that Vlad's struggling with? And not really. I mean, you can see like his batting averages are all good against all pitch types. I mean, you'll find guys that have drastic splits where they'll hit like 190 against breaky balls. And we look, and like I said, I'm not the biggest XBA proponent, but Vlad had a 298 XBA against fastballs versus a 272 batting average. He had 281 XBA against breaking balls with the actual 252 average, and a 294 XBA against all speed versus a 266 average. Why is this? Well, largely probably due to the hard hit balls, the EVs, because that's what Savant's looking at. A lot of Savant's expected stats, as we discovered, are built just on exit velocities and launch angles. So there you go. I mean, that's kind of what you're looking at here. We got a couple more requests, but as I mentioned, Vlad, too many ground balls. So this is kind of one of the major things. I don't really use any of these run value things for hitters. It's whatever. Pitchers, more useful. Talk about another day. If you want to get into detail, you can kind of look at the swing and take metrics and how does he do against different pitches, like where the pitches are located. And I'll kind of save that because it's kind of in-depth stuff that, it's more complex than it needs to be for just evaluating a player. But I think plate discipline metrics are important. And actually, I'll briefly hit on Vlad, and then we'll go to, there was Morel and Elly, which are both polarizing players for this. So those will be good to discuss. So you'll see the common mistake people make where they'll quote whiff rate and contact rate. They're the same thing, but inversed. Whiff rate is literally how often a player swings and misses. Contact rate is how often a player swings and makes contact. So contact rate is literally just the opposite of whiff rate here. So Vlad's contact rate this year, fine, 77%. Opposite of whiff rate, 23%. So that number's fine. I look at chase rate. Like you can see the MLB averages here too, which is good. So Vlad, the league average chase rate, 28.5%. Vlad right there at league average. Vlad's on contact, 85%. Right there at league average as well. So really, Vlad checks every box except for the fact that he hits the ball on the ground too much. His outlier season was obviously the minor league parks, 2021. He devoured. Will he do that again? Probably not. But I think Vlad's still going to be a good player. And I think he's a good dynasty buy right now, honestly. So we'll get some polarizing players now. Christopher Morel and Elly De La Cruz, two of the more polarizing players in baseball. Sorry. Talking by yourself is get your throat dry. But if he wants to hop on, I'll be glad to pop any of you in if you want to come in and chat too. I'll just make you a moderator and you can come chat with us. But I will continue on with Christopher Morel. Pop says, I have no clue how to evaluate his profile. Yeah, Morel's profile is very, very tough for several reasons. And we'll look at it here. Well, it starts out, it's pretty polarizing. One, because Morel hits the ball hard, but Morel doesn't make enough contact. So the contact rates are horrific. Remember, contact is the opposite of whiff rate. His whiff rate is 37%. That's very high. That means we're looking at a contact rate of 63%. That's not good at all. Go down and just look, and he said MLB average whiff rate was hovering. I don't remember what it was when I was looking at Vlad. MLB average whiff rate 24.8%. Morel 37% whiff. That is 12 percentage points worse than MLB average, and it explains why his whiff rate is second percentile among all hitters, and it certainly helps explain the strikeout rate of 31%, also very, very bad. His chase rate's actually manageable. People talk about him being an aggressive hitter, which when I look at this profile, okay, like he sees pitches in the zone, close to league average. He's swinging at pitches in the zone, a little bit above league average, which is good. I would say like zone swing percentage, if you're above league average, is a really good thing to look at. So if you're being more aggressive in the zone, awesome. That means you have a good eye and you know the zone well. Obviously, chase rate, you don't want to see that be high. And Morel's tolerable there. I mean, he's right at league average of chase rate. So he's aggressive in the zone, but he's not chasing out of the zone. Good. That's what we want to see. When he does chase, he doesn't make contact enough. League average chase contact percentage, 58%. Morel, 42%. No surprise, considering he doesn't make contact in general. First pitch swing, hyper aggressive. 42%. League average, around 30%. So Morel is very aggressive on the first pitch. And this kind of tells us that, okay, this is the book on him. He's always been aggressive on first pitch. So pitchers know that, and they're going to kind of exploit that. They may throw him a breaker on the first pitch. They may mix it up. They're not going to give him the same pitch, the first pitch from the bat every time, because why? He's going to swing. So let's give him something that's hard to hit, maybe even throw something that dumps out of the zone. He's going to swing more often than not at that first pitch, while most guys are kind of sitting on and waiting. As I mentioned, the whiff rate, the contact rate, very, very bad, and that is the meat of the problem. Everything else is fine other than contact. You look, okay, the ground ball rate dropped significantly this year. It was actually below league average, which is encouraging. You want to see that. 51% last year, a little bit discouraging, but this year, 42% ground ball. But sweet spot percentage, not good. 29% sweet spot percentage, that is not ideal at all. The MLB average sweet spot percentage, 33%. Well below league average there. Why is that? Well, we're seeing mixed bag of results. Like I mentioned, the ground ball rate is actually pretty tolerable. Scrolled way too far. But he's got a kind of a large portion of fly balls and even pop-ups. He's above league average in pop-up rate, and he's well below league average in line drive rate, which is obviously meaning he's not going to run. So when he makes contact, the quality of contact while he hits it hard, you factor that in this fact that he is not consistently hitting the ball at ideal launch angles, therefore not as many are going to fall for hits. He's almost like selling out for power, getting more fly balls, trying to hit the ball over the fence, and they know they can exploit him with off-speed pitches and breaking pitches. So that's where this is useful. Morel has a 154, or did have a 154 batting average against off-speed pitches. Yeah, the XBA of 213 looks a lot higher. That's still not good at all. Breaking ball batting average 237, XBA of 245, and the whiff rate against breaking balls a whopping 43.8%, meaning that Morel's making contact on just 56% of breaking balls. Guys, let me just tell you, this is why I'm selling Elijah Green, because while Elijah Green is tooled up to the max, this is the kind of profile you're looking at, but way worse contact. His overall, we mentioned Morel's overall contact rate, 63%. Elijah Green's overall contact rate was 56%. So he was whiffing way more against breaking balls than Morel is. So I'm off of the Elijah Green train. And this is interesting because this is where this kind of comes into effect. Morel has always hit fastballs good, but he actually saw more fastballs this year than in 2022. Not a huge increase, but enough to a 3% jump is noticeable. But let's go just this season, and let's look at a month-by-month basis. Did a book get out on him over the year? Kinda. I mean, not too noticeable. September, smaller sample, but he did actually see more fastballs that month, and he hits fastballs well, so that's kind of interesting to see. But it's not surprising to see him getting more breaking balls and even off speed, considering the struggles with those. Morel does a lot of things well. I mean, obviously, he's a decent runner. Again, sprint speed, not the most useful thing. Sprint speed, I'll just show you real quick while I'm on that tangent. I just don't like quoting sprint speed at all, because here's what it's defined as. Sprint speed is Statcast's foot speed metric, defined as feet per second in a player's fastest 1 second window on an individual play. For a player's season average, the following two types of plays qualify for inclusion in sprint speed. The best of these runs, approximately 2/3, are average for the player's seasonal average. Runs of 2 bases or more on non-home runs, excluded being a runner on second base when an extra base hit happens, and home to first on topped or weakly hit balls. I just don't think sprint speed is the most useful to correlate to things. Yeah, I mean, it's great to see like guys like Elly up there, Bobby Witt up there. But like at the end of the day, I would say probably home to first time is going to be your best bet, because that's clocked consistently. It's a consistent measure versus a small 1 second window of a sprint speed burst. Like, I just think that the variable with sprint speed is versus you look at home to first, same distance every single time. Therefore, you can get a hard number, and it tells you a better picture of a player. So that's obviously important, but also factoring in the difference in, a lefty and a righty. So you got a bunch of lefties up here, and then you got Bobby Witt Jr. I mean, his sprint speed's elite, so it's no surprise that he still clocks in a pretty good home to first, even being a righty. That's why scouting grades are different for righties and lefties for sprint speed. So that's just something to look at there. So Morel has good sprint speed, but Morel has the struggles with the contact rates. And I feel like Morel's always going to kind of struggle with that. Like, that's just kind of the profile of who he is. I mean, he's going to hit the ball hard. He's going to be a really fun player at that. But I have just concerns that he can make the profile work, especially if the Cubs are willing to go all in. He may not have a spot. I mean, we forget teams value players a little bit differently than fantasy managers do. And so they look at this stuff and they're like, can we afford to have this kind of bat in our lineup? I mean, he's getting on base. 2 seasons of 311 OBP. Can we afford to have that in our lineup? We could fill the spots with better players. And maybe, I don't know, but the Cubs this offseason seem to be kind of being aggressive. All the metrics are good, though. Barrel rate, 16%, really, really solid. Considering MLB average, 6.9%. And no surprise, the barrel rate, 95th percentile among all hitters. Average EV, really good. So Morel's kind of like TLDR, is that hits the ball hard, doesn't make much contact, has good speed, and can use it when he gets on base. Elly, fun profile. If you want me to break down anybody else, drop it in the chat. Kind of look over them. Man, look at some of these home runs that Elly mashed, like on the spray chart over here. We know that he's got tremendous upside. I'm not in the least bit surprised that he struggled upon his debut. I mean, this is the profile that's going to struggle. I mean, just naturally when they come into the major leagues, because why? They're aggressive, free swingers, struggle with contact in the minors. we're likely going to struggle with in the majors too. So the good news is when you look at the K rate, yeah, it doesn't necessarily match the whiff rate, but what can we learn from that? So I'll just from the start jump and kind of go to the batted ball profile. We know Elly has all the tools in the world, hit the ball on the ground too much. The good thing is a lot of line drives. Again, we are talking a small sample here. So ultimately, like Elly could end up being fine in all of this. I mean, we don't know. It's hard to say. But it's encouraging to see the amount of line drives. And even with the high ground ball rate, he was able to sustain and do a lot of things well. So Elly, he mashes pitches up in the zone. He does. I mean, that's just who he is. Get him a pitch up, he's going to hit it. And we know he hits the ball hard, absurd exit velocities. I mean, to have a max that high, I told you max is not that useful, and it's not, but a max that high at his age is kind of crazy. 9th percentile is up there among the elites. 45.9% hard hit rate, 75th percentile. So some of these are coming from the fact that he's hitting some ground balls. He's not hitting the ball in the sweet spot very often. 30.5% sweet spot rate. That's below MLB average. And therefore, like the natural like exit velocity on a ground ball or just a chopper, it's not going to be as good as you would a line drive. So while the average EV looks good, the hard hit rate is pretty much in line, I guess I'd say. But your barrel rate of 8.5%, just slightly above MLB average because go down and 55.3% ground ball rate. Is that fixable? Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. Like the question like to always go back to is like, is this who the player's always been? Like, has Elly been a guy that consistently hits the ball on the ground? And to some extent, like, yeah, he has, but not to the extent we saw in the majors. So we can look from 2021 on. I'm just looking at his FanGraph page because that's broken down by minor league performance. So 43% ground ball, 44% ground ball, 37.3%. And then this year in AAA, 43% ground ball. And that jumped significantly to a 54% ground ball rate in the majors. So why? I mean, like, was there a book out on him? Let's go look at what kind of pitches he was getting thrown month over month. Was there a book out that he put a certain pitch type on the ground more? And you look and you see, okay, he got a steady dose of more fastballs as the season progressed. Inconsistent results of off speed, but kind of if you had a regression line here, it would be similar. And he actually got less breakers. And in September, he got more. But let's look at the ground ball percentage. Was there a certain type of pitch that he was hitting on the ground more often than not? All of them. So it was just kind of a general thing. Like he was hitting the ball on the ground more often than not. And so I'm going to pop over and look at something else real quick. So this is a cool, some more in-depth stuff. It's not public. I wish that it was, but I'll share it with you because I think it's pretty sweet. All right. So what were we getting out of Elly De La Cruz? And why was he hitting the ball on the ground more? Let's add a filter of, let's see if we can do it by month and where exactly he was getting thrown these pitches. Pitches. So complex. There's so much stuff on the site. It's ridiculous. But anyway, I mean, you can see like with Elly, I don't even think, did it pop on? I can't even tell. Yes, there it is. Okay. Sorry, I was looking at a different screen. He's doing most of his damage up in the zone. It's just what you see there. I mean, the slug, the top of the zone, really, really good. So naturally, like, that's what he's getting more often than not. I mean, look at the 9th percentile EV, 109.4, just elite numbers there. Good news is he's not whiffing very often. He's getting a ton of barrels. Those things are really, really good. Let's see. Oh, that's a lot of pitches. Let's filter by pitch result. I wonder if we can filter by just ground balls. Sorry, this is still really new to me and very, very complex. Ball and play result. There we go. But I won't it by batted ball type. Okay. Here we go. Let's see. No, I won't like batted ball type. Maybe that's what we need. Here we go. All right. So let's see. There's a lot going on here, but it feels like there's not a strong correlation of where he's getting ground balls. A lot of pitches down. Obviously, that's going to result in more ground balls than not. And so it's just a mixed bag of what you're seeing. But in general, Elly's putting the ball on the ground. And I don't have a good way to explain, like, is there a certain pitch type that's causing that? You saw all pitch types were causing that. So is Elly going to lift the ball more? I mean, history would tell us yes, because he's never put the ball on the ground at the kind of rate he did last year. And the launch angle was incredibly low, but all those things are fixable. You look, I mean, he's a switch hitter. Is he putting one on the ground more than the other? Nope. Both putting the ball on the ground a ton. Not good launch angles. Either way, but his sweet spot percentage was a little higher as a lefty. And even the hard hit rate, much better as a righty. So interesting stuff on Elly. He's a polarizing player. The upside is like Fernando Tatis good. The downside, still probably a power speed guy that hits 240. So all in all, I would say it's like pretty fine to invest in Elly De La Cruz, just from the standpoint of what's your worst case outcome. Like, even if it's worst case, I still think you're looking at a really solid fantasy contributor. Colton Cowser's a fun one. He's got a lot going on. Where does Colton Cowser do most of his damage? And you kind of look, okay, he likes his pitches up and in. Really anything up or inside, he's doing a lot of damage on. So that's obviously where he likes his pitches. He's got to do more damage on pitches lower in the zone. Those are turning into a lot of ground balls, and ultimately they're hurting him. So this is actually something I could have gone and done for Elly. I mean, Cowser's not putting the ball on the ground too much really anywhere. You look at lower in the zone, yeah, I mean, he's putting the ball on the ground a decent bit. But ultimately, the damage is coming from that same spot where the slug. So, like, you look at the slug graph, it's exactly where exit velocity is coming from too. And his damage is right there. He likes the ball up. So is he getting the pitches there consistently? I mean, actually, he's getting more pitches down and away than where he is in the spot where he likes the most. So he's going to have to make that adjustment to hit these pitches down, and even some down and in, because, you know, you watch this change when we go from this is where he's getting most of his pitches to this is where he's doing most of his damage. It's the exact opposite. So pitchers are pitching away from him right now. And you have to wonder, like, is he going to be able to fix this? I mean, most of his swings stay in that same spot as the slug, which is really fun to see and look at. With Cowser, I mean, is he going to lift the ball enough? Yeah, I mean, he's lifting the ball where you want on the pitches you want him to lift the ball. Those are line drives plus fly balls, doing some good damage there. I think Cowser's pretty polarizing for several reasons. For one, the performance when he came up, like, he did a lot of damage, and then he seemingly like fell off a bit. I mean, just look at the slug here when you got the grids. Most of his damage coming middle in and up. Exactly how that heat map kind of defined it. Cowser hits the ball hard. It's obviously important to see. Average EV of 90.2 miles an hour, 105 90th percentile, which is well above average. Contact rates are fine. I mean, 70.6% contact, and in zone of around 79, 80%. Still pretty good. He's so patient. He doesn't chase. And I think that's part of the problem with Cowser is that he is just he's ultimately too passive, and maybe that's not a bad thing because a young hitter being passive and choosing his spots is normally a pretty good thing. But it hurts when you get a pitcher or a hitter that is ultimately not choosing their spots correctly. And for a young hitter that's passive, they can get into trouble that way. So with Cowser, let's go back to what you can see on Savant. And obviously, the performance was really bad in the majors. 77 plate appearances. It could be, I mean, it couldn't really be much worse than what we saw. But what was the difference from the minors to the majors? I mean, he was hitting the ball not quite as hard. The average EV dipped about 3 miles an hour. His max EV was right around where his 90th was in the minors. So that's obviously pretty important. And he struck out a ton, but also while walking quite a bit. He walked 17% of the time, which is cool, but not when you're striking out so much and putting the ball in play. The ex-Wobicon, not good on the balls he's putting in play, 319. Again, really small sample here, so let's not take too much into account of what we saw, knowing that Cowser is a better player than this. So he got a healthy dose of fastballs, especially in August. Too small of a sample to really look at this graph anyway, just because of the nature of how little bit of time he was actually in the majors. High ground ball percentage, high line drive percentage too, which is what you want to see. And this is kind of who he was in the minors. But I think here's the biggest concern. Even though he didn't chase at all, I mean, he chased at a 20.9% rate, which lined up exactly what he did in the minors. First pitch swing, 22.1%. Morel was like 50%. So polar opposite ends of the spectrum there. And his overall swing rate of 40%, 7% below league average. The zone swing percentage, you want to see a little higher than 62% when the league rate is 67%. So you would like to see that a little higher. I think the passivity is really the biggest flaw here ultimately. And how does this shake out for Cowser? I think Cowser is a buy in Dynasty because people sour on these players so quick when they come up to the majors and don't immediately perform. Yeah, it was a rough going, but in AAA, over 400 plate appearances, he hit 17 home runs, stole 9 bases. He hit 300 with a 417 OBP and a 520 slug. The ground ball rate was 44% in AAA. It was 47.5% in the majors. Zone contacts, pretty similar. Overall contacts, pretty similar as well. The EVs did drop a bit, as I mentioned. A 4 mile an hour actually difference from AAA to the majors, which is substantial. But I think Kyle Manzardo put it a pretty good way when I'm talking to him in Arizona. He thinks that exit velocities are influenced pretty significantly by pitch type and pitch location, which is actually a pretty good point. I never really thought of it that way, but I think that he's onto something by looking at this and saying, okay, like, yeah, I'm going to think that my bat, I'm going to try. Manzardo's factor is like, he's not going to try to smoke the ball. If I hit it 105 every time, then that's all I need. Hit the ball where it's pitched and know that there's only so much I can do. And obviously swing speed, bats, all this stuff influences that. But there's also the fact that pitch type and pitch location matters too. And I think Cowser was just getting pitched around a little bit. And he was a little bit too passive as well in the majors. I'd say he's got 20 home run pop because he hits the ball at ideal launch angles. I think those exit velocities will improve just based on what we saw in the minors. And this is more than just 2023. Last year was good as well. And the amount of line drives, the sweet spot percentage was really good. And ultimately, if he can go from being too passive to being just selective, and there's a difference, then he's really going to benefit. I don't want my hitters to walk 17% of the time. That's great in real life, but for fantasy, not so much. Not swinging is getting deep into counts, and it's inflating the strikeout rate significantly. So that's obviously not the best thing in the world. So with Cowser, it's an interesting profile. I think he gets a shot to play every day next year. And I'm believing that he will bounce back, even if it's not immediate. So he's a buy for me. Interesting profiles between Cowser and like Elly, totally different kind of thing. Anybody has any random questions about Savant? Anything you've wondered? That's just a brief breakdown of using the player profiles. You can also see like alignment, like how often they were shipped or shaded. Obviously, you can't shift anymore, so the shaded. There's a lot on Savant. The search feature is pretty in depth, and I think that's probably one for another day, just like teaching about the search feature. But when I look at just kind of a summary, like when I'm looking at Savant player profile or just like trying to judge a player in general, I think that the best things you can really look at are barrel rates, like how often are they hitting the ball hard in an ideal launch angle. Average EV is a good indicator as well. Or if you go over to our leaderboards on the Dynasty Dugout, you can look at 90th percentile, soon top 8th% as well, which is the driveline metric that they use, which we kind of talked about. Also, how often they make contact. Like, what's the batted ball type like? The distribution, ground balls, fly balls, line drives, going to be a better indicator than average launch angle. Sweet spot percentage, really good as well. That's just how often they're hitting it between 8 and 32 degrees. The plate discipline metrics are huge because, like we saw with Morel, it doesn't matter how hard you hit it or how often you barrel it up if you don't make consistent contact. So the big three that I like to look at are zone contact percentage, the MLB average this year, and these are going to be different. Fangraphs and Savant are going to look a little different just because pitch tracking stuff. The MLB average on zone contact for Savant, 82%. The league average chase rate, I think chase rate's really important. Some hitters can make a high chase rate work. Others, not so much. But the chase rate, league average 28%. Cows are obviously well below that number. And then contact rate, which is just the opposite of whiff rate. So the MLB average contact rate was right around 75% because the whiff rate was right around 25%. So those are kind of the things that I just look at to judge a player. Do I use rolling graphs or heat maps at all? Yeah, absolutely. I think those are really big too. I actually don't like Savant's rolling graphs as much, and the heat maps are decent on Savant. I'll actually pull some of those up. So to get to, and then maybe an easier way, I don't know this is what I do. If you want to get a heat map for a player, click Illustrator. It's going to pull you, it actually pulled me a different tab, so I'm going to have to switch that. Let me switch that out real quick. Let me add in the other tab. Slowly but surely. So Illustrator, you can really look at anything. You can change it because this is going to be like, so this is your typical like 9 square with just like the shadow zone as well. Just outside the zone, you can change it by year type. Obviously for like a Cowser, let's go to somebody with like a, what are we doing? Okay. Look for somebody with a bigger sample. Mr. MVP, Ronald Acuna Jr. It defaults to total pitches by zone. So it's funny to actually, and so like this number looks really big, but in the grand scheme of things, like look at that zone and realize how much bigger it is versus like the individual zones in the zone. So he's getting more of a, down and away kind of thing. But you can see like on the heat map, like that's a better illustration, but versus what you're actually looking at in the 9 square. You can go to pitch heat map. And so there's a lot of fun ways to kind of dice it up on Savant. You can look at like a spray heat map, like where's the ball going? That's kind of weird to look at. I'm not really sure what's going on there. But then a spray chart. And so this is overlaid in Kaufman for some reason. Terrible park to hit in. So like if we were thinking like, okay, let's just look at like Shohei, if I can spell his name. Let's just say Shohei signs in Atlanta. He's not. The Braves aren't going to pay that. Whoa, like he's going to get a lot more home runs. Like you saw that change from where it was in Angel Stadium. Well, not too bad, but it all kind of depends. Let's say he goes to Yankee. I'm going way off topic of heat maps, but I'm just curious now. And where are the Yankees? I can't even find them. At the bottom, duh. Yeah, lefty in that porch, Ohtani would just mash. That'd be awesome. So anyway, you can kind of see like where they are doing the most damage. So the hexagon chart, I don't love that. I like a pure heat map the best, which True Media's looks much better for that, because you can just filter all these things and get the heat map for all of it. But you can also see like where they're doing the most damage. Like you can see the launch angle in the field. That's whatever. You can see the exit velocity in the field. Let's go back to the pitch chart and look at the zone. So like, where's Ohtani doing damage? Oh, literally everywhere. It's like he's just mashing the ball everywhere. Funny enough, like balls inside, not doing as much damage. And I wonder if it's actually inverse for the lefty being up here. So this is technically outside. That'd probably make the most sense. Launch angle. I would say that heat maps are useful to some extent, because like you can't, I don't even know if they have it on here, of like swing percentage of like where they're swinging the most and then where they're getting most of the pitches. But that's kind of telling too. Like, I'll just go over to, I'll switch back to True real quick, just because it's got way better heat maps. Let's see. All right, here's Ohtani's. We'll just go to, where's swing percentage? We'll see like pitch percentage. And then, so where's Ohtani swinging the most? That's in, like inside pitches is where he's swinging the most. And then where would he be getting the most pitches? I know it's on here somewhere. Oh, pitch frequency. Okay, so he's getting pitches away from him versus swinging more on the inside. So Manzardo's a good case, as I showed Manzardo the other night, actually. But Manzardo like knows where he wants his pitches, and he said he prefers him like middle in. And so like there's his pitch frequency, like where Manzardo's getting most of his pitches is like middle down, and where is he doing most of his swinging? Middle in down. Where is he doing most of his damage? Okay, same spot he's swinging. Those are good things when they're swinging and doing damage there. The rolling charts, I'm actually going to go to Fangraphs. They are much better on Fangraphs than anywhere else. Savants, I don't know. I don't love their rolling charts, but Pete Alonso is kind of polarizing. So let's go to Alonso. So here, go to graphs. It's at the top of the player page. And then this is going to default you by year. So it looks like Savants. It's like just kind of annoying. So we're going to filter by game. And then I typically do about a 15-game rolling average. You can change that if you want. So this is messy because there's so many years. But what changed with Pete Alonso this year? So this is just WOBA, but I'm going to do this. So I typically go, and I like to filter by plate discipline. So O swing is chase rate. We look at zone contact. All those things are going to kind of give you a decent idea of like, did anything change with Pete Alonso? There's a lot going on here. I'm just going to go single season, just 2023. All right, so Alonso's WOBA was completely up and down like all season. So let's just take this out. Like, why wasn't it consistent? We'll kind of look through and figure it out. So now we're just looking at chase, contact, and zone contact. So the dotted line gives you like the regression line, which is like the average throughout the year. It's like zone contact, like slightly above 80%, overall contact, slightly below 80%. Like it was inconsistent. The chase rate actually trended upward as the season went on, because he got better, like he chased less. And it seems like he was kind of pressing. So I typically say like when a hitter is chasing more, they're in a slump, like Pete Alonso was just trying to do too much. Go back to this multi-year view. And you can see here that actually, interestingly enough, Alonso's chase rates were actually down like in 2023, and the contact rates pretty similar. year over year. But you can filter by like anything. Was he just hitting the ball on the ground more often? Let's go back to this year. Well, it's kind of messy. Like looking at, you would want to filter if you're doing like 3 years. Let's go to like 30 game rolling average, just to it's not just choppy like you see. And again, you can filter this however you want to. I think rolling graphs are very useful to tell a story about a player, and like it tells you more of like what's going on. Like, why did they slump during a certain time? I wants to comment a player where like this somebody slumped at some point, and you like we can just kind of look at that and see like, why were they slumping? But anyway, here's Alonso. I'm trying to think of like a polarizing player. Morel, he's like a streaky player. So we'll just look at Morel's graphs and kind of see what's going on there. Ads everywhere. All right. So Morel, we don't want to do by year. We want to do by game. Don't really care about WOBA here. Look, it's all over the place. Exactly what you would think from a player as polarizing as Christopher Morel. So let's look at his decisions. They're always bad, but we can at least get a decent idea. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to take out WOBA. All right, so Morel actually improved his zone contact rate, which is positive. So those numbers improved heading into 2023, but exactly the inconsistency that you might expect to see. The interesting thing is when he was making less contact, more of his contact was on the ground. The ground ball rate was super high while he was making less contact. So the majority of his batted balls were pounded into the ground. And then the ground ball rate went down, back up, but he was way above his average right there. Also, while he was making way less contact. But dang, okay, Morel went on a pretty good streak here where he was making some really good zone contact in the season. And even though it dipped towards the end of the year, I mean, those rolling numbers of 82% are still much better than we've seen from Morel throughout his career. The contact rates overall have been up and down, as have the chase rates. So the chase rates are interesting. Typically, when Morel is chasing less, he's making more contact. But Morel is historically a high chase rate guy. I'm actually going to pull up Ozzie Albies because Albies is a notorious like free swinger, high chase rate guy. So let's just see what he's got going on. If you have any questions you want me to answer when I finish this up, drop them in the chat, or I can bring you on the stage. We can chat face to face. If you want to chat face to face, though, let me know because I'll have to make you a moderator so I can bring you on. But we'll just look at this with Albies real quick because I think Albies is pretty polarizing when it comes to like plate discipline too. So Albies is notoriously a 40% chase rate guy, but he makes it work. Why does he make it work? Because he makes enough zone contact. Like he's doing enough damage on pitches in the zone to negate all of this. Hitters that chase at a high rate typically don't excel, but Albies has excelled because he's done stuff like this. The zone contact consistently has improved throughout his career. And for a lot of this season, he was running zone contacts over 15-game spans above 90%, which is really, really elite. Like, that's a number that you love to see. I know he missed 2022, a lot of it with injury. So, put a lot of stock in that. I'm going to do 30 games so we can kind of see more of a broad range. So, yeah, I mean, look at that consistent improvement with Albies' zone contact rate. Like, that's a sign to buy for me. The overall contact rate consistently is improving as well. In reality, like the chase rate, while it's still high, like he's a free swinger, has gone down in some sense. And you can just see here, here's the nature. I mean, Albies just swings a lot in general. But the swing rate kind of follows his O swing. I mean, it's not like he's just chasing a ton. Like his swing rate in general is really high. His zone swing rate. I mean, this is what I love. He's hyper aggressive in the zone, but it actually improved this year. I mean, those numbers look much better. Not to say it's bad to be swinging that high rate in the zone, but it's okay. Like that can work. So The rolling graphs are useful in a lot of ways, because those tell you kind of a story of what's happened over the season. Jeff asked about Sean Murphy, who's he fell off a cliff, like went completely the wrong way in the second half. I think he was playing through a concussion and even a hamstring injury. That's my theory, and that may be just me trying to convince myself of that. I do think that the rolling charts are the most useful for plate discipline metrics, ultimately, especially considering like you're not getting the Statcast stuff on here. You can do it on Savant, but in general, like this is kind of what I'm looking at. So let's just look at Murphy's 2023 season because things kind of tanked. You can see we'll just see it's like his WOBA. Get out of here, video player. The WOBA was all over the place. I swore I clicked just 2023, but I hadn't refreshed. Okay, here we 2023 only. So really good WOBA. It tanked. This is around when he had the concussion, actually, or maybe the hamstring injury. One of them went back up and completely dipped. Also, just getting so much inconsistent playing time, I think, killed him. I'm going to drop that off real quick so we can take a closer look at the plate discipline metrics. Here's the interesting thing, guys. Contact improved, got better throughout the year. He had a little dip here, but the contact rates got better throughout the year. The O swing stayed really low. That's a really low chase rate. And his swinging strike rate actually got better. So he was swinging and missing a lot less. So what the heck's going on here? Like, I mean, while everything else looks good, let's just look at his batted ball distribution. We can look at that as well and see, like, okay, we see that the contact rates improved, but did the batted ball distribution change throughout the year? So, yeah, his ground ball rate went up. Like, his ground ball rate actually got better in the time when he was slumping, but he was hitting so many fly balls that didn't matter, and he had the really high ground ball rate to end the year. And ultimately, the line drive rate, as it went down, the performance also went down. His home run to fly ball rate, kind of all over the board, but the home run to fly ball rate was just incredibly low to end the season. And that may be a telltale sign in itself that he did have some bad luck. Factor in, this is not great Statcast. This is just hard hit balls in general. And yeah, that the hard hit rate tanked around mid-July, like after the All-Star break. And this is when he was dealing with injuries. So I mean, actually, let's go to Savant and just pull up his page and be like, okay, can we look at a little more detail? I'm dropping my phone. But the interesting thing, you look at Murphy's profile, it's like, good gosh, man, like this is like really good stuff, like across the board. Let me remove this one and share the Savant one. Wow, like this is good stuff here across the board. Everything looks really good. Why did Murphy suck so bad in the second half? I'm hanging on to that it was injuries more so than anything else. So you can do the rolling charts here. I like Fangraphs a little better, like I said. But even during his slumps, like his expected WOBAs, or his WOBAs were way higher in 2023, even in the slumps. So look at the slug. They tanked pretty significantly. Let's just go to just 2023 because it was really a tale of two halves. Yeah, I mean, well above MLB average, and then it went way down. The average launch angle, like I said, launch angle, whatever, but it did go up, and then it went back down. We saw the ground balls on the other side go up as well. Here we go. Average EVs. I mean, yeah, they went down, but like, it was okay. Maybe it was a substantial, like we're looking at like consistent, like 91, 92s, 93s all the way down here. Then we dipped to 87s, 86s. This is over 50 batted balls of a rolling sample. Started to come back up at the end of the year, but still not great. Hard hit percentage tanked. Same time that he was like right after the All-Star break. It tanked. I'm just kind of under the impression that he was playing hurt. His K rate still in check. Like the K rate went down too. Like it's a really bizarre profile, in all honesty. But I'm kind of in the camp that Murphy played hurt, played with concussion symptoms all year, and that is the reason that he really struggled. But